Halona, hello.
Hi, Taylor. How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for speaking with me. It's a joy to see your smiling face today. Um, I will say that you are a lawyer and a life coach and a mom and an activist, but I do not like to claim identity. Could you please, how do you describe yourself?
I describe myself in very general terms as an advocate. It's something that's been part of every career that I've had. And so representing the needs and the desires of my clients, whatever shape or form they take. Advocacy, I think, describes it best. But I was a social worker and then a lawyer and now a life coach. And so, yes.
When I started this project of speaking with smart leaders about speaking and listening, I thought it would be about reflecting on how one speaks and listens. And I'm realizing that the reflection is really at the core of this, which is why I was so excited to speak with you. When we spoke once in the past, you talked about how your work is very intense, that you have to listen very carefully as a life coach and then go into speaking. And I was wondering if you could reflect on that
Mhm.
a little more.
Sure. Well, so I was thinking also about our conversation, and the part about speaking and listening that most remarkable to me is that listening, in particular, um, for a lot of people, is sort of a passive event. And the reality is that listening really needs to be as active as speaking. And one thing that I notice in general with folks is that a lot of people have a tendency to either interrupt, which just happens, it's just sort of a natural thing that some people do, or to just complete, just as the speaker is finishing speaking, the listener starts to speak. And to me, that sort of illustrates the lack of active listening, because if you are thinking about what you're going to say next, it's hard to be actively listening. And so one thing that is a huge part of my work is really trying to be in a very engaged way, be a listener in an active way, so that I can receive the information and process or digest it before I reply. And sometimes I think that it's a challenge to give that space between the end of listening and the beginning of talking. I think that a lot of us are uncomfortable with those, what feel like vacant spaces. But the reality is that there's so much, that's where the engagement happens, I think, when the first person finishes their speaking, and then the listener has a response or a reply, or a reflection that the listener has received the information in an active way. So I've thought a lot about that piece of it, that it really is that engagement, and it's active on both sides, but there's that piece in the middle where it's almost like there's a meeting of the minds at the end of the speaking.
Do you find that some people are less comfortable with that space, that they themselves as a speaker want to fill it in before you respond?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that I think that a lot, and that in my experience, certainly, if a reply doesn't happen immediately, um, it might feel to the speaker, they might feel unheard or misunderstood, and those silences can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I really think that, and for me included, I count myself among that group. It's taken time for me to allow myself that quiet moment, to either let it be absorbed or let the listener reflect on what's been heard. But we are, there's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of, in general, there's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of energetic, we take up a lot of space energetically. And now I think in the age of devices and, handheld devices and that type of thing, screens and so forth, the spaces are full always, at all times, I should say. And it takes a lot to allow that space, for things to rise up organically or germinate, in between those two parts of the conversation.
One of the things that I think can rise up is the chatter in our heads and
Mm-hmm.
the chatter of everything else around us. How does one, how do you, how do you cope with pushing that out and just creating a space for the relationship to occur?
Um, I see that kind of as a muscle, like anything else, and so it requires a degree of, um, it requires practice, a mindfulness, to use a term that a lot of people use, but there is that sort of mindfulness that we need to allow a pause, and it takes practice. I think that a lot of times, as a practical matter, in a physical way, you can, take a moment or two and count, or take a deep breath in and a deep breath out to create a physical space for, those thoughts to settle. And we all have a lot of chatter in our heads, probably some of us more than others. Um, and we're constantly going. I joke a lot about how, if I ever go to have a massage, it's very hard for my brain to settle down in 60 minutes, because I'm thinking about the next things that are going to happen. And so in that respect, I have started to use breathing techniques to slow everything down, to slow down my mind and my heart rate, so that the chatter can subside some. So it really, I think taking moments make a huge difference in that space.
Thank you. Um, as you reflect on your career, and you talked about being an advocate across the board, is there different ways of speaking and listening when you're in the role of a lawyer, when you're in the role of a parent, or in the role of a life coach?
Yeah. Yes. Because the job is the responsibilities are different, what we're trying to achieve. With lawyering, there's a lot of, uh, information gathering. And so the way that we speak and listen is, it has a very specific, there's a task involved. And certainly with children, making sure that, it's in some ways the opposite, I think. Not that we don't listen to our children because we must, but also I feel the responsibility of relaying a lot of instruction to my children, and hopefully not in a taskmaster kind of way, but preparing our children for the next stage of life requires passing along information. So that's a different kind of, communicating with children. And then in a coaching way, in some ways it's information. It is, of course, there's information gathering involved in it, but a lot of what I need to do in the listening piece of it is, interpreting a lot of what I hear from my clients. And so they often, um, could share information about something that's happened in the day, or in some ways like that little small talk, that chatter that happens in the beginning of a conversation. And it's part of my job, I think, to be able to incorporate everything that they're telling me, the things that feel like small moments and the things that feel like breakthroughs, and weave them all together so that they can see that what they're doing um, meets the purpose that they set out to meet in the beginning of our engagement.
Thank you. That idea of information gathering and information imparting, um, what does somebody know? What do they themselves know? What can you help them see? What are you learning from it? That's a wonderful framework for understanding discourse and relationship and what we glean from the world and from people around us. Thank you. Halona, when we first spoke, you also talked about your work in music and in jazz. And I we started talking about jazz as a tool for listening and reflecting. And that's where we left off. I'd love to hear if you've thought more about that since.
I have thought about it. I chuckled to myself about being considered someone working in the music industry, because I have been working in the music industry, but certainly not as a musician. And so the time that I've spent, I can't remember now if we spoke before or after I went to Jazz Day this year, but I've been to 2 Jazz Days and have worked on the team um, executing the educational programs. And the piece of the experience that's meant the most to me is really seeing how jazz has been used as a vehicle, or can be used as a vehicle for communication, and therefore a vehicle for peace. And it provides a means by which people from all different areas of the world and speaking different languages, certainly everyone doesn't speak the same language when they all come together from 295 countries. But there is, with no words, this ability for the participants to communicate through music, and in a really in an orchestrated way that is, I don't even know how else to describe it except how enriching it is to watch a group of people who have never met before, in a matter of moments, create something that is whole. And it's really been wonderful. So I'm learning new things about how music can be used to communicate. I know that music, much like physical art, is it tells a story, it gives information, it shares expression. It's an expression of feeling, and so I have a new appreciation for how music is so universal. And the piece about jazz that's the most fascinating to me is how it is it's so largely improvised in these situations that it really has more of a language feel than previously orchestrated pieces of music. Does that make sense? That it's impromptu, and the expression happens all together with no rehearsal.
That gives me tremendous hope. Is there anything else about speaking and listening that you've reflected on that you'd like to share?
I thought about it earlier today, and I was just thinking, to me, it was the first time that I thought about how so many of us have a lot to say that really is valuable, and we are worried in the crowded spaces that we won't be heard, And so that really, that in some ways it made me feel a little bit sad, but it also just that how many of us might not be feeling heard and then at the same time probably seen. Um, but also it gave me, um, some sort of warmer, comforting feelings that there's so many more of us who could be participating in all of these conversations, whatever they are. And so my hope would be that we could get to this place where everyone feels heard and seen. But that was kind of a little light bulb that went off for me this morning. Just that we all have a lot. We all have so much to offer, and I hope that there's space for everyone. I think there is.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me some space, and thanks for creating more space in my head. I really appreciate it.